Matt is a field biologist with the Johnson County Park and Recreation. Some of you may recall he gave a talk a few years ago about his work, and it was just really fascinating to hear the very unique aspects of his position in Johnson County and the very large number of areas, natural areas that Johnson County that he manages. And many of these are prairies. I also might mention that Matt's been very generous in terms of collaboration with people at KU. Courtney Masterson, who talked earlier in this series, she did large deer enclosures at some of the Johnson County parks, and Matt was very helpful with that, both in funding and just collaborating on that. And those of us in Jim Beaver's Dimensions grant, both soil and seed has been collected at some of the sites that he manages. And today I think he's going to tell us about this Big Bull Creek Park, which is a very large restoration project. Go for it.
All right, so glad to be here today. Big Bull Creek is a pretty cool project. It's one of the largest park sites in the Kansas City area, and it's definitely going to be the largest prairie restoration when we're finished with it. And my position is field biologist with Johnson County, and we do a lot of land management, and we have about 10,000 acres of public land. 8,700 of that are natural areas. So people think groom parks, and we really are spending a lot of our time managing natural areas. And today I'm going to be going over a little bit about our process, our planning, and how we're implementing getting a large scale park and prairie restoration on the ground. So it's probably a little bit different from some of your presentations you've had in the series so far. So I'm going to go over the land history, us purchasing the property, the master planning process. A lot of times we purchase park land and it sits and we finally get funding and then we're able to get it rolling. Talk about park development. We have a district natural resource plan we just finished, and then we'll finish talking about the complexity of the Big Bull Creek Prairie Project. So the land has some interesting history. There was a pre-Civil War battle of Bull Creek just north of the site, where there was a skirmish where James Lane and some Kansas residents sent some Confederate militias back to the Westport area. There was on the actual prairie site one of the first Catholic churches in the Kansa territory that burned down, and it was moved off. And there's Native American encampments as early as 1200 that we've seen remnants of on the sites. So there's a little bit of interesting history across the 2,000 acres of the land. So we purchased the land way back in 1998, and that got us almost 2,000 acres. My supervisor made a lot of handshake deals, but 2 pieces of this property were purchased with eminent domain, which to the residents in the Edgerton area was a little bit painful at the time. And then to add to that pain, the parkland sat from 1998 until 2017. We recently got another 80 acres. So it was purchased and it just sat there. So it's a giant piece of public land and everybody could see it, and it wasn't open. So there's quite a bit of frustration there. So we decided to master plan it. We found the funding for that. And our master plan process can be fairly involved with the public. And sometimes when the public wants ball fields and soccer complexes, that's the direction a park goes. And what we heard through the public engagement process is no one wanted to see this 2,000 acre property developed into recreation fields. They wanted this thing kept as wild and as scenic as possible. And so we brought a contractor in to help us write that master plan. And Frank Norman, most of you may know Frank, was involved in that process as well with a couple contractors. And so we came up with a kind of a cool idea that instead of cutting a park up into a lot of pieces, what if we could designate 500 acre core habitat areas, large enough, that we have the energy for grassland birds and pollinators to have some serious core habitat that matters. We decided we wanted to try to get as many of the habitats of eastern Kansas protected as possible. It has an absolutely stunning riparian forest with no invasive bush honeysuckle. There's a savanna area that we'll be restoring. And so we decided that we can try to take large chunks of this park and restore it as the best examples of this habitat we can in eastern Kansas. We want to manage it for some uncommon wildlife, and we want to try to manage the area in a way that with changing climate, that this site can weather the storm, be it seed blends that are different or from further away, and whatever we can do to make the site adapt over time to change. So we started looking at circulation in this park, and it's really painful that when we purchased this land was before the large railroad complex was thought about. And at the time, it was just out in the country, and now there's a huge intermodal railroad that has been developed adjacent to our park site. So for the residents of Southwest Johnson County, this site has been a blessing, in that it's a huge expanse of 2,000 acres of public land that actually ties into the Hillsdale Lake complex in Miami County. So our public land connects into, I believe, roughly 10,000 acres of public land in Miami County around Hillsdale Lake. And we are a big portion of filtering their drinking water with this park site adjacent to this large railroad complex. So we looked at circulation of cars. I-35 cuts through the center of the park. 56 highway cuts through the park. So we have lots of challenges. In the initial park plan, we tried to get a land bridge over I-35. And when the park board asked about what mega animals would be using it, we said monarch butterflies, and that didn't fly. But we did at one point want a gorgeous prairie land bridge over the interstate connecting all these prairies together. That didn't happen at the time. It would have been more than we spent on the park development. And then we proposed habitat zones, and really what a lot of this park was ready to be was prairie. You can see that a huge expanse of yellow is all supposed to be upland prairie on this site. So we also, that purple, we have an existing quarry, which could eventually be ours whenever it is mined out. At this time, it's private land. So the park really is broken up into 3 quadrants with lots of different habitat zones. Throughout the master plan process, we started kind of designing where a scout camp would be, where public access and campgrounds and things like that would be. And at this point, we've just developed a playground shelter complex on Sunflower Road. We've developed a disc golf course and a couple other features and 8 miles of single track trails. So it's a very wild park, but we did break it into a north, a central, and a south zone with a very small amount of development in the south zone near Hillsdale Lake, and it progressively has a little more park development. So we finally found the funding to open the park. There was a mill levy increase that allowed us to get Big Bull Creek open. And so the residents of Johnson County were super excited to get this thing off the ground. And in 2017, it happened. We had about $7 million in funding that was able to open the park, build a maintenance compound, and get the site accessible to the public, and we began planting prairie. At the same time, we did a natural resource management plan for our entire park system, and we did inventory all 10,000 acres and looked at absolutely all the land cover types in our parks and our goals and our funding and how we should be managing these natural resources, which is pretty unusual in the Kansas City area. And so we looked at our funding compared to other agencies around the country. And as part of this plan, we did a specific master plan just for the natural resources of Big Bull Creek. And we figured out that we really need to complete the conversion of cropland to prairie, get the very light invasive species under control, restore a savanna complex that has some amazing oak species along Bull Creek, and then begin long-term monitoring. And so we just started doing long-term monitoring of the prairies this year. So our natural resource plan created some funding and created some direction down at the Big Bull Creek site. And one of the things we figured out is, of the park site, it's pretty interesting to see that almost 900 acres of it were non-native grass. And that really is something easy for us to flip. And that gives us some amazing opportunities to convert it over to prairie. So as a land manager, it's pretty neat for me to get maps of all my park sites and know what kind of land cover I have throughout them, and understand some of the fights we're up against when we see it actually broken out. So very few agencies are able to do that. Another important part is we broke the entire 2,000 acres up into management zones. And so we broke every single section up, and it has its own goals and benchmarks for every single part of the park. And this helps my land managers, my park managers, and park workers not be overwhelmed with a 2,000 acre park site. and they can come up with goals for each individual section of the park and how we're going to manage those. And so it can be pretty frustrating to work in a very large park and not see improvement. So this is a lot more helpful for them when I break it down into manageable sections. And we even graded the land cover types, which is where Frank Norman came in. And so contractors went out in the field and they graded every single habitat type. And all of our brand new prairies were just a year or two old. So everything in yellow that you see is new prairie. We graded them all as just D, because none of the complex species or conservative species we'd like to see had it grown yet. But it gives us kind of some benchmarks of the quality of the riparian areas and gives us some goals on flipping the scores on some of these areas higher and higher, and make sure that work is being done. And as we do long-term monitoring, we see progress and we update our land cover maps and the quality of the habitat. So it's a pretty unique thing in the Kansas City area to have this kind of information on a park like this. I have this data for here at Bull Creek and at Shawnee Mission Park. So I'm pretty excited to have this, and we're going to continue to do this kind of work around with our other large regional parks and begin grading, evaluating, and long-term monitoring, so we make sure that the management we're doing in the field is pointing in the right direction. And so pie in the sky wise, if we broke up all of our management units and completely restored to the utmost ability level, it would take us about $6 million using contractors and staff to completely restore, manage, control the invasive species, thin woodlands, get rid of eastern red cedar, things like that. So we knew that there was no way we'd get $6 million in funding to restore Big Bull Creek by itself. So we broke it out over 10 years and worked on some priority projects. Things like removing specific groves of cedar trees, restoring the savanna, removing invasives in specific right-of-ways, improving ponds, and restoring some low-quality native areas. And so we broke it out and figured out that we could get the funding taken care of in the first 5, and then we have a map of the next 5. And we get ourselves at a manageable area where you could see the investment and the improvement without being overwhelmed by the cost. So about $1 million instead of 6 or 7. And so after all that planning, we had to actually make this work happen. And so JCPRD is a special park district, the only one in the state of Kansas. And we have our own mill levy on property tax. And so we have a funding source that very few park systems in the state of Kansas have. Even with that funding, the scale of the site didn't make it possible for us to do the work alone. And so we did work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They helped get us some funding. We worked with Miami County Conservation District. They've been a huge partner on this project, because everything coming off Bull Creek and from that intermodal are going into their water source for most of northern Miami County. So they have created a pretty large funding source. The KC Wildlands seed team, I think Linda Larabaum, the program manager for Wildlands, has spoken to you all before. But having that local ecotype seed team helping us collect seed has been really important. And the group that used to be called, I guess they're called Deep Roots KC now. The native plant group in the Kansas City area has also been a cheerleader for us on this site. And so we've been able to get boots on the ground, and our park staff have spent just hundreds of hours planting prairie on the site and getting things in the ground as well. So there are only 3-time staff for Big Bull Creek. I have a staff of 5 that assist as well on the 2,000-acre park site. So that Wildlands seed team had a pretty cool project last year where we were part of a 5-star grant with Miami County, and we tasked KC Wildlands with collecting remnant seed from all over Miami County for the project. And so we went all over Miami County, identified remnant prairies, and the team went out and collected seed. And that seed came up to our seed barn in southern Johnson County, was processed. And then we planted a really diverse 80-acre prairie on the site with all that remnant seed. Through that process, we found some remnant prairies in Miami County that were unknown and some folks that weren't familiar with conservation easements. And so while we were getting the seed, Miami County Conservation District was actually talking about trying to work on conservation easements with some of these landowners, and we're able to engage them and possibly save some sites from development down the road. And so on top of us getting the seed, it was a really great outreach for that organization in Miami County. Our seed team collects about 200 species a year, and we can get anywhere from $80,000 to $150,000 in remnant seed. And that gets cleaned into the barn and then sent out to remnant prairies and woodlands all over both sides of the KC state line. And it's been a pretty cool project. And with Bull Creek, we've definitely needed this seed in addition to the commercial seed that is purchased for our prairies. We do have a seed harvester, which is a fairly unique piece of equipment. It has a wireless remote and it sits offset to a UTV, and we're able to collect native grasses, forbs. It's got rice cutting teeth where it can sever something like a coneflower head and throw it in the hopper. And so I think there's Caitlin Amerland, who works with Grassland Heritage Foundation, and then she also works for me harvesting some native grass seed from a site. And so that's another technique we have, is in addition to the hand collected seed going onto the site, we do have the ability to manipulate that machine all the way down to the ground and collect something like lead plant, and then take it 6 feet up to collect Indian grass and other species. So for about a $13,000 investment, that seed harvester is much more maneuverable than a combine and can collect quite a bit of seed for us. So it's a unique tool we've been using down in Bull Creek. An important part of the project for us has been making sure these prairies are diverse. Some of the first ones we planted were more of a CRP blend, where you're looking at about a 50% grass to forb ratio. And as more funding has come along, we've gone through post-fire and we are broadcast seeding an immense amount of forbs on the site. And every winter we're going back and hopefully if we have snow cover, we're using snow cover. And we're going to continue to overseed and overseed and overseed these sites until we start seeing all the conservative species we would like to see. We've had pretty good success with this at Og Prairie and Shawnee Mission Park, Kill Creek Prairie out in Western Johnson County as well. And so overseeding is going to continue to be a big part of this project for the first 10 years. And so in the last winter, we did do that 80-acre 5-star grant with Miami County, which was a big task. We've been doing large-scale removal of tree lines for the grassland bird species on the site. We've been trying to remove as many trees from the core prairie as possible, and that has ended up with an immense amount of tree piles, brush piles. We have a forestry mower that mounts on a skid steer, and we've been removing brush thickets and trying to open up this core prairie. So we're looking at about, in the project now, around 380 acres are on the ground of the initial 500 we're looking for. We have the possibility of eventually having maybe 800 to 900 acres of the 2,000 on the site being in some sort of tall grass. And you can see on a map here, up in the northwest corner, you've got Edgerton, Kansas. And you can see the quarry, and everything in green has been planted. Everything in yellow was planted last winter. And now we're beginning to stitch the rest of the smaller pockets together with some higher quality, really diverse plantings in between. And we will begin, every year we're doing long-term monitoring to make sure these are going in the right direction. We do have some single track trail that goes under I-35, and now you can hike from the entry point on Sunflower Road all the way down to the Miami County line. And we've gotten it to a point where you could walk for a straight mile in new tall grass prairie on the site. So we've met a pretty cool benchmark. And we do breeding bird surveys with our Kansas Master Naturalist chapter, and we've been doing butterfly surveys as well. So we're trying to for long-term, monitor as many different indicators as we can on how this site is changing. A big part of Bull Creek for us is fire management, and we have a pretty solid wildland fire team. Everybody takes S190, S130. But the scale of burning at Big Bull Creek is something that is way different than our smaller remnant sites and our smaller prairie restorations. So instead of burning a 4-acre field or a 10-acre field, we're beginning to burn 100 acres at a time or 200 acres at a time, which is different from us. So that's required investing in large fire skids for trucks, additional skid units for our UTVs. We're beginning to use a lot of leaf blowers on these fires. And so we're trying to put as much fire down in the first 5 years as the project as we can, and overseed, burn and overseed, and make sure that we're pointing in the right direction. Since I-35 is in the middle of the park site, smoke management is super important. The smoke on one side of the park can only go one direction, and the smoke on the other side of the park can only go the other direction. And that really decides our burn days. And so we'll get our entire team together from around the county, and usually have 10 to 15 people on the fire line. And I think last winter we burned 280 acres of the site. This year, we're going to try to burn at least 250 acres of the site, and begin rotating all the fields through different fire regimes. So I do have a video of the scale of the site, and we'll see if we can get this to flow for us. I'm going to jump ahead here. So the park site is meant to kind of engage the public with some very easy garden prairie plantings and then pull you into a nature playscape. And then the idea is to lure you out into the tall grass prairie and very intentionally not overwhelm you with the scale of the site. And so once kids have gotten out of the car and they see some plants and they see the playscape, and then they go through a tree line, and then that kind of opens up into this large scale habitat. So this drone footage is looking over some different prairie restorations on the site, some more grass heavy than others, and you can see us operating the drone on that road there. But this kind of gives you an immense idea of the site and then the development happening to the east of the site. And so we're going to continue to be like stitching together little missing pieces of this kind of giant quilt of restoration on the site. And so you'll see little patches here and there, 10, 15, 20 acres at a time that haven't been converted. And each winter with funding, we're going to be using both the Wildlands native seed that's local, and we'll be using our commercial seed through a bid process. In the center of the site, there are a couple large silos that are pretty iconic and help you kind of reference where you are on the property. And we're hoping that maybe there's an art project in the future where maybe we punch LED lights through it, they're painted or something like that. So they're pretty iconic, and it would be really neat to somehow make these two silos a focal point for the development. There's lots of brush piles. I think we have 150 brush piles that we need to burn this winter. So the kind of the scale of the work we're doing here is pretty immense. You can see the quarry there to the edge of the site. We call it Mount Edgerton because it is a pretty immense development just adjacent to us. There is a cemetery in the middle of our property that the Catholic Church owns, and we do have an easement that gets them up to their cemetery, and then we own everything around them. So it's a really neat site to work on, and I appreciate getting to go out there and work on a site this scale in Johnson County with suburban prairies. I think our county was like 80% native, and now we have like 0.006% of that left in the county. So it was pretty neat to have policymakers and elected officials green light an ambitious project like this, that we threw the idea out there of making this happen, and nobody said no, and we were able to move forward with a project this big. So that is my overall presentation, and I'd love to chat and do questions and answers and discuss the site. Research-wise, I have funding available. if there are some research projects out there. And this site could definitely be an additional field station location where if you have a student that is looking for a specific project, we are definitely here to support work like that if anything comes this direction. So if we have any questions, I'd love to chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to do the hand clap majigger reaction. So I'm just going to stop the recording now. That's what we'll put up, and then I'm happy to entertain any questions. I know we have a few, so please feel free to put something in the chat, and I'll relay it to Matt. Stop the recording.